Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Jones. Welcome to interCHANGE. Thank you so very much for joining us. Lots to talk about today. We'll leave the discussion about Egypt to the experts at the network this week. Governor Scott Walker is shaking things up by doing exactly what he said he was going to do, and public employee unions aren't too happy about it at all. We'll talk about the elections coming up Tuesday. Is there any way to predict who's going to come out on top in the race for Milwaukee County Executive? And we'll talk about the renewed whining. We're starting to hear about proposals to require voter ID. We will also discuss what finally drove the state's teachers union to throw Milwaukee Public Schools teachers union under the bus. Joining us tonight, our longtime business reporter for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, now retired, doing credit counseling, Avi Lank. Longtime state Senate Republican aide and oftentimes a fill-in host over at WISN Radio, Kevin Fischer. Denise Callaway, the coordinator of business and community partnerships for the Milwaukee Public School System. And Gerard Randall, consultant and local job creation expert. Rick Horowitz will be along after a while with commentary at the end of the show. Okay, you can't say you didn't know it was coming, but Governor Scott Walker has dropped a bombshell proposing big pay and benefit cuts for public employees here in Wisconsin, taking away many of their negotiating rights. And if that doesn't work, the other alternative, he says, will be lots of layoffs, maybe thousands of layoffs. Kevin, you know, the media is all excited about this right now, but this is exactly what he said he was going to do.
You would have had to have been in a coma or in a cave somewhere, as the governor said, if you're shocked that this came today. And really, what choices do we have? We are so far in debt and in deficit that you don't want to see the alternative of laying off thousands and thousands of workers and sending thousands of families off of Badger Care, which would be the ramification if we don't do the reasonable and responsible common sense approach here, and that's ask public sector employees to pay more towards their pension and their health care, just as their counterparts in the private sector have done. People in the private sector understand. They get this. They're frustrated. Enough is enough, and you will have some opposition. I don't think in the rank and file too much. I think they knew it was coming, and I think, get it and understand it. Your union bosses, on the other hand, are out there. They are the loud, whiny minority that are taking shots at the governor. Marty Beal, the head of AFSCME, likened him to a plantation owner, which is ridiculous. Marty Beal makes $163,000. That's almost $20,000 more than Governor Walker does. The median income in the state is under $40,000. The median income in the state for state employees is under $46,000. Something has to happen. It has to happen soon, and it will. The schedule is out. The bill will be introduced Monday. The Joint Finance Committee will get it the next day. It will go to both houses of the legislature, and by the time we're on the air next week, it'll be on the governor's desk.
Avi, I thought it was interesting how Walker said, I'm not negotiating because I have nothing to offer.
Right. Where does Kevin get the word ask out of this? He's not asking anybody anything. He's telling them this is what it's going to be. And the strictures in there on unions essentially make the unions, they can only get a one-year contract. They can only negotiate over wages, and they've got to get themselves recertified every year. Maybe he saw it coming, maybe he didn't. What I find interesting is a couple things. One is he's exempted police officers and firefighters, but he has not, sort of interestingly, exempted prison guards union. And I'm sort of wondering in the back of my mind if he isn't almost hoping for a showdown with them so he can have his Ronald Reagan Patco moment out of it. There's something else in that bill that I think is interesting when you talk about, we can't continue to borrow and borrow and borrow. The governor's going to borrow a whole bunch of money in this bill. He's proposing, he's got $213 million of principal on state bonds that come due in May. And he's saying, I'm just going to borrow the money to pay off those state bonds, and we're not going to pay that money back until the end of 2021. And it's going to cost the state an extra $54 million, 54.6 actually, million dollars in interest to do this. How is that responsible? When I have someone come in and see me at credit counseling, and they have a deficit between what they're earning and what they're spending, we have a nice long talk about it. And the answer is there are two parts of solving that problem. One is you got to spend less, cut back on your cable, this kind of thing. But the other is you got to earn more. I don't think I've ever had a client who could successfully get themselves out of that thing just by spending less.
You're not suggesting we tax more now.
I am suggesting.
Because that's DOA.
I am suggesting that a responsible government trying to solve this problem would look at both sides of the equation. There are places where you can think about taxing people more, and there are places where you can think about cutting, and a responsible government would present them both as a package.
But you know,
and not stick to some ideological thing that no tax is ever any good anytime, anywhere, period.
But Denise, that is exactly what Walker said during his campaign, and that's exactly one of the reasons people voted for him. He said, I will not raise taxes ever.
Well, it is, but I think we have to kind of take a look at the situation that we're in. We're really in a very difficult situation. These are very, very tough times. The decisions that the governor and other folks are going to make over this, I don't believe that any of them really want to do this. They're saying, oh, good, we get to do X, Y, and Z. I think they're doing some things that are very difficult and hard for people because these are very tough times. So I think in tough times, you really have to be open to whatever possibilities are there to dig your way out of this. And I mean, that's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to dig our way out. And it's not going to be easy, and there are going to be some tough decisions that have to be made on both sides. I think that Avi may be right. Are there some things that we can do in terms of finding a way to raise some revenue? What are those? Are they palatable to folks? And if so, those are things that I think need to be on the table.
Well, if you two can
well.
come up with the ways and how we tax the unemployed even more and try to get money out of that turnip, I'm all ears.
Now, there's a great deal of
unemployed. Kevin, where did that come from?
Yeah,
You got people that have been handed pink slips in this state, and now you're going to say we're going to raise their taxes?
That's not what I said. That's not what Avi said.
This is one of the most overtaxed states in America, and these two want to tax us even more.
There's a great deal of speculation now, though. They're going to. I don't like to use the word decimate, but they're going to change the relationship with the public employee unions,
Yeah,
so it doesn't cost so much.
it.
But then they're going to give the local governments the power to do the same thing.
That's
so
right.
people shouldn't be surprised now when Walker says, we're cutting technical education, we're cutting the UW system, we're cutting shared revenue municipalities,
Everything
we're
should be on
covering
the
K
table.
through 12, and if you want to make up the money, you have to go to your unions and get it there.
If everything should be on the table, so should increasing revenue.
I
That
think
is
that's
exactly
exactly what's going to happen.
And everything isn't on the table.
because
No,
our-
everything should be on the table to cut. You're not going to raise taxes. It's two different situations.
Our relationship with municipalities in this state around shared revenue is certainly going to be stressed. Local municipalities that have relied on the revenue that comes in from the state they help collect, that's certainly going to be diminished greatly. And the only way that the administration is going to be able to offset that is by allowing the municipalities a lot more flexibility to recover some of that money through where they're saying they're having the toughest time meeting their own budgets. That's around the benefits package that they offer to municipal employees.
That's 85 to 90% of their budget.
Of their budgets. And so it's not a surprise that would also be the tack that they'd use. But I think it's going to be a test of whether or not local governments have the will to do it. We've seen increases by school boards to pay higher salaries to their negotiated employees, school teachers in some of the Milwaukee suburban communities. I think you're going to see a lot more sanity come around what is offered in some of these compensation packages because they simply will not be able to afford it going forward.
All right, let's move on to the next topic. An important election is coming up Tuesday, but it hasn't generated much excitement at all. Two big questions. Who will make it into the finals to replace Scott Walker as Milwaukee County Executive? And will the conservative, David Prosser, hold on to his seat on the state Supreme Court? And that is such an important race, Avi.
Yes, the Supreme Court race is. I have no idea who's going to. I suspect Mr. Prosser will make the cut. I have no idea who's going to run against him. The interesting thing in that race, I think, is that the lure of public financing money has probably brought more people into it than had been expected a year ago. As for the county executive race, I think it's a pretty good bet that Representative Stone will be one of the two finalists because he's the most conservative amongst all the people who's running, and I think that the people who support him will come out and vote. I think we can not worry about Ms. Griffith. See, I don't even know her name. I'm sorry. And then we've got Lee Holloway.
Godzilla.
Okay. We've got Lee Holloway.
Haven't you been paying attention, Avi?
How do you mean Godzilla?
Lee
He
Holloway.
compared himself to Godzilla.
Right, he compared himself to
compared
Godzilla.
Godzilla. All right.
Come on, Avi. You're supposed to be prepared when you come on this program.
Darn. All right. And we got Lee Holloway, we've got Chris Abele, who's probably the most interesting of the candidates, and we've got Mr. Sullivan. And I would think those three, one of those three is going to make it. If I don't know, because it's real hard to tell what Labor will pull out for Mr. Sullivan, how the black community is going to respond to Holloway or Godzilla. I'll remember that now. And Abele's...
We haven't seen the ad, so that's not good news for Lee Holloway.
Abele's an interesting candidate. You know, he's got the most money. He's spending his own money. He's doing a lot of advertising. And he's got some interesting ideas from his past public service about maybe restructuring county government. The problem I have with what he's doing is he seems to be talking about cell phones and cars for people, which I assume somebody's advising him that that's a good way to get people to pay attention to what you're saying, but I don't understand why he isn't really talking about the media issues. Maybe he's going to wait to see if he makes the cut.
He has all this money. He has a machine in place that he inherited from the Barrett campaign. He has to be doing his own research. What is telling him to put hundreds of thousands of dollars of his own money into this race right now? He just added a couple $100,000 more of his own money. Is he behind, or does he just want to make a big splash?
Well, I mean, I know that there has been some polling that's being done. So, you know, when we see candidates adding more commercials after they're doing polling, it usually tells us they have some concerns about how well they're going to do. So I do think that that's part of it. I think part of it is, too, he really, unlike any of the other candidates, the other major candidates, really have a track record when it comes to politics. People know who they are. People don't know who Chris Abele is. So you're going to have to spend some money to tell people who you are and what you're about. And in 30 seconds, he picks, I think, those hot button items that he thinks are going to register with people. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to cut perks. I'm going to make sure that I work with anybody I can to create jobs. I mean, he's hitting some very quick, hot button items that are going to get people's attention and give him an identity, because that's really what he's doing with these commercials. He's creating an identity because for many people in this community, he doesn't have one.
Kevin, last week you said, I have no idea how to even call this election. Has anything changed in the past week?
No, I think it's very difficult, and I don't think there's the interest that this deserves. It's an important race. Whoever wins, it's their job if they want it for the next 8 to 12 years. But I believe Jeff Stone will make the cut, being the only conservative in the race. He has the backing of all the Scott Walker voters, and that there will be some momentum carried over from the November election to now. I believe if I had to pick a second person, it would be Chris Abele, because for two reasons. All those ads, people will probably remember that name and that face when they go in to vote, even if he doesn't have an identity or a clear message, and I don't think he does. But I think that these are the real red meat eaters that go out and vote in the primary. Democrats who will vote are going to look at the person who they believe is best equipped to win, who has the best chance of being victorious. And they probably see, because of Chris Abele's wealth and the ability to get message out, that he is their best hope in the general.
There is a possibility of a shocker, though. I remember, granted it's two completely different situations, but when Tom Barrett was first running in the mayor's race on election night, when Marvin Pratt came out on top, and nobody expected that. I think it's possible Holloway could.
No, but that's Marvin Pratt, who didn't have any baggage of any significance. Lee Holloway does.
Lee Holloway's got a lot of negatives.
He has negatives. However, he also has a lot of positives going for him, including a long history, a long relationship in the African American community. If they turn out. Right. That's the big issue. If they turn out, he's going to get 70% of that.
February election in an odd year.
It's got to be a ground game. I mean, it's really got to be the people bringing people to the poll.
Here's where there's, I think, going to be perhaps a shocker. The Supreme Court race is going to be more of a game changer in this sense. You've got the unions that are now, especially public employee unions, that are now highly upset with what the Walker administration has proposed. They are going to litigate this thing as much as they possibly can. That's going to mean it will end up in the Supreme Court. Elements of these initiatives are going to end up before the Supreme Court. They need that swing vote, which Prosser represents a key piece of the majority. They're going to try to move him out. Locally, that means if they're backing Sullivan, the unions could put Sullivan into a two-person primary final.
You know, let's touch on this for just a minute. By the way, Jeff Stone, he's one of the state lawmakers who has really taken the lead in efforts to get a voter ID law passed in Wisconsin. I can't believe that this won't finally be approved in very, very short order. I know you don't like the idea, but I think it's an excellent idea.
It's a little more subtle than I don't like it. I think that voting in Wisconsin is very easy. I noticed this when I moved here to the state in the 70s. But voter ID is the wrong way to solve the problem. If all you're trying to do is make sure that the person who is registered is the person who is voting, there's a much better way than requiring a picture ID. And it's used in several states, including, I happen to know for sure, New York. And that is when you register to vote, you sign a form. They've now taken in some places in New York, then they translate that into one of these screens that they use at Walmart, you know, when you sign. When you come to vote, you sign. And they compare the signatures. And if the signatures match, everything's fine. This is superior to voter ID because it leaves an audit trail. You know, if somebody shows the wrong ID, they've showed it to the worker, they walk away, and that's it. To sign something, if there's a question about the vote, they can go back and compare it. If all this was about was making sure that the people who are registered are the people who are voting, that's a far superior solution. Of course, we all know that's not what it's about. What it's about is suppressing democratic votes.
That's silly.
No, it's not.
All right, Kevin.
It's crazy.
Kevin, if that's crazy, would you support then having people sign in so you have an audit trail?
I actually would. I think
would that be a better idea than voter ID?
Better, but I think it's another.
Why not just ask people, show me your driver's
ID.
license, show me your ID? I've never understood what is even remotely difficult about that.
There's nothing difficult about it. He asked me the question, Denise. But I defer to you.
Thank you. Since you've already kind of answered quite a few, the thing that's wrong about the voter ID piece is it penalizes those people who don't have the ability to obtain a voter ID or to obtain an ID that can be used to allow them to vote. It does that, and I think because
They can't go to the Department of Transportation?
it makes the assumption that everybody has easy access to transportation. That they have those other documents that they may need to prove that, and that that's something that's done easily. I do not understand in this state why we want to do something that's actually going to take a right that individuals have and make it harder for them to exercise it around a handful of cases of voter fraud. That doesn't make any sense. If we had a situation where we'd had many, many documented cases of voter fraud, absolutely, then it makes sense to do this.
Absolutely.
But we haven't
don't.
had it. We have not had it. So, to do something that penalizes a part of the population that has the least ability to recover from this, to be able to get the things that they need to be able to vote, takes away a right that people have fought for, that people have died for. And that is, for a state whose motto is forward, I don't think we want to go backward. And that's exactly what we do with voter ID.
Do you really think there are that many people who always vote, who like to vote, who think voting is important, that will say, okay, because I have to get an ID, I'm not going to vote anymore?
I don't believe that to be the case. I think that the integrity of the elections that we have in this state, because it is easy to vote, I think that's important. I think that those who have proposed some form of identification being presented, whether it's electronic signature or whether it's a picture ID, that having that type of documentation is a relatively simple, and certainly they bent over backwards to make sure that there's no cost, that they can make it as easily accommodated as they can possibly make it. And so in some ways, I think the other arguments are lacking in persuasion in the sense that whatever they propose simply doesn't balance out with the need to have integrity to our election process.
But if
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I was going to say a signature would take away all of your objections, and amend the bill so it's a signature, that would be fine.
And this idea that, it doesn't make any difference whether we're talking about 10,000 people who won't be able to vote because of this, or 10 people who won't be able to vote. It's the idea that here in the state of Wisconsin, we are guaranteed the right to vote if we meet all criteria. There's no asterisk there that says if you have a voter, if you have a picture ID. There is a right to vote that people have in the state that we're talking about denying to some people who do not have the ability to get a picture ID.
That right to vote will be defended aggressively,
That's not a poor excuse.
and it will be protected, and
Yes.
especially for those of us who want to ensure that our vote matters. One vote per person, and that person who is
Justice
voting
John Paul
has
Stevens, in the United States Supreme Court case that took up the Indiana photo ID, the most stringent in the country, pointed out that the opponents could not bring one person to the fight that was disenfranchised because of the photo ID requirement.
Hey, let's just talk as long as we're
Disenfranchisement is a horrible, horrible, weak argument against
is.
photo ID.
Truth
as
is
long as
happened
we're
to
talking
people
about
in
things coming
history
out
in
of
this country.
as long as we're talking about things coming out of Madison, let's talk about this proposal from the State Teachers Union, WEAC, this week, that all of a sudden something they had always been opposed to, they're saying maybe we should break up the Milwaukee Public School District, even though it's a different union that represents MPS teachers, and maybe seniority shouldn't be such an important factor in paying teachers. Denise, you think this is going anywhere at all?
Well, it's not what I think. It's what people like the mayor and some key state legislators and the president of our school board have said, where they said it's not going anywhere. They think it's a bad idea. The issue is not the size of the district. The issue is what things the district needs to be able to do to be more responsive, and our new superintendent has taken some great strides in doing that. So it's not an issue of the size of the district. It's something that's been mentioned, my gosh, I can remember for the past 30 years. So that's really not the issue. I don't think it's going to go anywhere at all.
I think WEAC just is trying to look like they're still in the game, they're still playing, even though
it's too late.
It's
too late. They, unfortunately, if it was an effort to curry favor with the Walker administration,
no thanks.
that train left the
They're
station.
not that stupid.
Mentioned trains. And you're right, Denise. It's been characterized by a lot of leadership as something that's a non-starter. People like Dennis Conta, back in the 70s, offered proposals to consolidate districts. And that's the thing that I think some have to look at, too. If you can make a district smaller, if you can cut it into parts, you can consolidate other districts. And so suburban communities are probably thinking, hey, this could happen to us in the reverse. So they're not likely to support it either.
Avi, 15 seconds. You think it's going anywhere?
No, and I've always thought that accountability is the problem, and I thought the best idea for the school district, you'll pardon me, was to have the mayor appoint the school board, because then you'd know who was responsible for what was going on there, and you could hold them
Then you'd have an
accountable.
unaccountable superintendent and school board, and you just talked about how bad photo ID is, but you're willing to take the vote away from other.
No,
right,
no,
well,
you'd
that's
still be able to vote for the mayor.
That's
The
great.
official name for the city might be Milwaukee, but lately, especially since last weekend, it might as well be called South Green Bay. Everyone wants a piece of that title town excitement, even Rick Horowitz. Rick.
Yeah, first thing I want to say, it was a total team effort, top to bottom. It's really rare to have a group like we had all pulling together in one direction. The backrests, first of all, I can't say enough about the backrests. Football season's a long haul. You need that kind of support if you're going to make it through. And we had foam rubber that just wouldn't quit. So that's the first thing. Plus the cable guys. I mean, none of this even happens without the cable guys. You know that thing you get when the picture freezes and then it breaks up into those tiny little squares? It wasn't anything they hadn't seen before. They were right on top of it. And the answering machine, not that your normal person would even think of calling us during the game, but just in case, we had the answering machine right there so we could stay focused. And how do you make this kind of run without the extra refrigerator in the basement? Impossible. But look, it wasn't only the liquids, not at all. The oven, let me tell you, the oven came through big time the deeper we got into the playoffs. You can't afford to come up short in the tiny hot dogs and tiny buns department, and the oven gave us everything it had. The microwave, too. Don't forget the microwave. See, that's the thing. When it was the oven's turn, we knew we could count on the oven. When we needed the microwave, same thing. Everyone had just one goal. No egos, no hidden agendas. Did we go through adversity? Sure we did. You can't accomplish something like this without going through adversity. When the crinkle-cut chips ran out, we went with the sea salt. When the onion dip went down, the 5-layer Fiesta dip stepped up, and we didn't miss a beat. That's the kind of depth we had. Pretzels, pistachios, cheese curds. No excuses. Just find a way to get it done. We even had chili one night. I mean, who has a bowl of chili right in the middle of a football game? But it kept us loose. That was the whole idea, to keep us loose, and it worked. Look, what it all comes down to is attitude. And this was the finest collection of appetizers and beverages and appliances I've ever had the honor of working with. We absolutely couldn't have done it without them. Oh, and the Packers are pretty good too.
Thanks, Rick, and thank you so much for watching. Stay warm. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.